thanks for staying. Not leaving. Anyway, forgive me for reading this. If I don't, I'll make a mess of it. So I'll just read this to you. And I need to make a disclaimer, given the caliber of the audience and the location of the talk here. It's always a walk down memory lane to come to UNM Los Alamos because I grew up in a house less than a soccer field length from here, and I got roughed up by bigger boys in the very area back over here back in the 1960s. But all of that is behind me now, and I'm taking on these bigger boys, as I'll detail to you tonight. I come to you as a journalist, a writer, an environmental scholar, rather than as a technical specialist. I know you're used up here to having people who are knowledgeable about small things and important things, but I'm a big picture guy. I've written on energy issues over the years, and I thank Don Meacham and others for inviting me to come here tonight. I think it's great that Los Alamos has such a thing, a sustainability forum, and I'm sorry that we can't crash the candidate forum that's right over there. I don't know who's running for what, but they probably should talk about these things too. I hope they are. Los Alamos plays an important role in the state of our nation, our state and our nation. It's known as a place of cutting-edge technology, both in and out of the weapons world. Since it's a taxpayer-funded facility, it has a role to play not only in advancing technology, but in participating in our country as a force for positive change. Los Alamos has a leadership role, especially in New Mexico, which is not always the most up-to-date in its economic or corporate practices. Growing up in Los Alamos, I often felt like I was on an island in the sky. But Los Alamos is not an island. While many of the personnel and funding for Los Alamos come from far away, our natural resources come from our surrounding arid region, which is facing increasing stresses directly related to climate change and increasing population. Here's the problem. The majority of the power used in Los Alamos is both insecure and unsustainable. A town capable of incredible high technology is depending on 19th century power sources for a majority of the electricity used to power its laboratory and its homes. This strikes many people, both here and off the hill, as ironic and contradictory. It is, I should say, being somebody who lives in Santa Fe, something that a lot of people have mentioned to me over the years, that Los Alamos is in this situation. Currently, Los Alamos gets just under 2/3 of its power from old coal-fired power plants. The largest is a 50-year-old plant called the San Juan Generating Station, and the second, the Laramie River Station in Wyoming. Basic technology for these plants dates back to the time of the Model A. Before we move on, in the current political environment, I have to say energy has become a polarizing and political topic. And we've heard quite a bit of it on the last presidential debate. It's good to be in a town full of scientists where we can look at some facts. First, no peer-reviewed scientific article disputing the human role in climate change has ever been published. The scientific basis for human pollution causing climate change is settled among scientists, and the body of evidence supporting it is large and robust. If anything, actual events like the shrinkage of the Arctic ice fields and emerging patterns of drought that threaten world food supplies are running ahead of computer models. I should say I was listening to KSFR on the way up here, and they are predicting, the National Weather Service is predicting warmer and drier conditions for the coming year, for 2013. And that's sort of a disappointment because they were expecting El Nino, which would have given us weather patterns, but they don't really see that coming up. Second, despite what some big league politicians say, there is no such thing as clean coal. The idea of clean coal came from an advertising firm called R&R Partners that was hired by a group of coal companies to advance their interests. The coal companies are spending about $35 million a year on their clean coal public relations campaign, trying to convince America that coal is neither dirty or a thing of the past. They're also spending about $7 million a year lobbying in Washington. And as Yale professor Richard Conniff says, and I quote, "Clean is not a word that normally leaps to mind for a commodity some spoil sports associate with unsafe mines, mountaintop removal, acid rain, black lung, lung cancer, asthma, mercury contamination, and of course global warming. And yet the phrase clean coal now routinely turns up in political discourse, almost as if it were a reality, close quote. Specifically, the idea of clean coal relates to speculative carbon sequestration technology at power plants, which has never been done and may never be scalable to address the CO2 problem from power plants, from coal-fired power plants. The other aspect of the clean coal fantasy relates to the idea that clean coal plants can clean up their emissions with better technology in the future. Yet, coal plant owners almost always resist pollution control technology when it is presented to them, and there is no technology to remove CO2 from coal stacks today. Various technological efforts to reduce CO2 emissions have so far come to nothing despite federal assistance. If anything, there are signs that the coal industry is retreating from its efforts to find a true path to clean coal. But insurance companies don't discount the reality of climate change. They have to pay for it and for its consequences. The insurance industry is already projecting a $1 trillion per year in climate change related disaster losses by 2040. So right now coal plants generate about 50% of the coal in the United States. They produce more than 2 billion metric tons of CO2, 36% of the total US emissions. So that's 36% of the United States' total CO2 emissions. But we've reached peak coal. 59 new coal plant projects died last year because of resistance from the public and the failure of local, state, and federal authorities to grant permits. Further, financing coal plants is getting increasingly difficult because of public opinion, but also because natural gas is much cheaper and has far fewer air quality or public health issues depending on how it is extracted. Also, natural gas plants are almost 50% more efficient in converting energy from fuel into electricity. If natural gas power plants replace all coal plants in the United States, we would see a 40% decrease in greenhouse gas emissions in the U.S. But before we get too excited about natural gas, remember that gas extraction is not without consequences. There are good and bad extraction technologies. And the hydrofracking technology used across the country today to access shale-based gas is polluting groundwater, a problem for which we have no known solution. That's a really important point. There's all this talk about fracking out there, and is it really polluting groundwater? It's another one of these things that's just, there's no question that it's polluting groundwater. This is not a good trade-off because there are other ways to extract gas without poisoning people, destroying wilderness, or depleting and polluting aquifers. Coal plants also produce coal ash, which blows in the wind and leaches into groundwater. Normally the waste is dumped into old coal mines or into pits. In the case of the San Juan Generating Station, there are pits right next to the San Juan River that they dump quite a bit of it into. Such waste contains toxic metals like mercury, arsenic, boron, lead, and selenium, but its disposal is completely unregulated by the federal government. There is evidence exposed in a recent lawsuit that coal waste is also polluting the groundwater in the Four Corners region. Local populations pay the price for coal ash. All of these pollutants are affecting people in the immediate area of the power plant most dramatically. Navajo people have suffered respiratory disease and mercury poisoning as a result of the San Juan Generating Station. Mercury gets in the rivers and causes brain damage in children. Would we accept these impacts in our community? The environmental problems related to the San Juan plant are similar for the Laramie River plant, which is the same age and about the same size. Los Alamos is directly responsible for a portion of the pollution that affects the world climate and local population and water supplies at Laramie River. Let's frame this conversation by asking ourselves, if the San Juan Generating Station were located near Los Alamos, would we find it an acceptable neighbor? Would we be okay with an 1,800 megawatt power plant at the base of the plateau or over at the lab? The plant creates a great deal of air pollution every year, including 13 million tons of CO2, 15 million tons of sulfur dioxide, 27,000 tons of nitrogen oxides, and about 700 pounds of mercury. The CO2 creates worldwide problems where all other pollutants are especially problematic for the communities and waterways near the plant. The fine particulates that come from the plant create haze over the whole region, which impacts national parks and tourism, which is a huge piece of our economy. The EPA has just sued the San Juan owners, which includes Los Alamos County, the power consortium that buys power for Los Alamos, to control these tiny particles, which also lodge deep into our lungs. At first, Los Alamos County and the Martinez administration joined PNM in suing the EPA to stop these pollution controls, as they're called regional haze, something that's been in the news quite a bit. Since then, cooler heads are prevailing, and it appears that half of the San Juan generating plant may be shut down and pollution controls added to the remaining units to comply with the federal orders. Even so, it will still be a huge source of pollution and ill health in Navajo country. Sandia National Laboratory estimates that the San Juan plant uses about 36 million gallons of water an hour. This water comes from the San Juan River, which is a tributary of the Colorado River, which feeds water to around 30 million people plus agriculture. The Colorado River is dropping radically because of climate change, which is already causing serious worries for city managers in Las Vegas, Tucson, Phoenix, and the metropolitan areas of Southern California. The water issue is serious in terms of sustainability. Climate change is causing a vicious cycle in the river basins of the Colorado and the Rio Grande. Shorter springs mean faster runoff. Higher temperatures increase evaporation at reservoirs. Increased drought stirs up dust, which settles on snowfields and increases solar gain and speeds snowmelt. Lower snowfall in winter leads to a lower runoff and dropping reservoir levels. Already Lake Powell and Lake Mead are less than 50% full, and the problem will only get worse, with many expecting abandonment of Lake Powell entirely in favor of Lake Mead within the next decade. Water for cooling coal plants is a huge waste of water. So for Los Alamos, it's time to get real about its electricity supply. The California utilities that own part of the San Juan generating station may pull out of their contracts early because of California laws forcing clean energy sourcing for California power. Los Alamos could also pull out of San Juan generating station early, or at least in 2017 when the Los Alamos contract expires at the plant. Likewise with the Laramie River plant. But what does Los Alamos do to replace this power? The 2 megawatt solar plant on the old landfill is a great first step, but wind and solar will only be reliable sources for critical facilities like Los Alamos when the energy storage problems are solved. Large-scale wind and solar need to be able to store their power for when it is needed, not when it is produced. And LANL could be a place where this internationally critical problem is solved. Right now, Los Alamos has access to about 75 megawatts of power at its peak, about as much as PNM's wind farm out in western New Mexico produces. This is not a huge amount of power, and the problem can be solved. So, Los Alamos should think about security as well. The 225 megawatt power lines that feed the neutron beam and the rest of Los Alamos are vulnerable infrastructure, both from a terror point of view and considering the fragility of our outdated national power grid. Los Alamos should seriously work towards energy self-sufficiency and on-site generation. That will come in 2 forms. First, the mothballed gas power plant that many people don't even know exists over at TA3 could be updated with a combined cycle gas plant that would be super efficient and use the waste heat from Los Alamos combined with natural gas from the pipeline to produce electricity right here in Los Alamos. I don't know how big a plant could be built there, but the gas supply from the Four Corners is reliable. Let's ask Congress for the funds to do that. But the largest supply for power in Los Alamos will come from energy conservation. Right now, only one building at LANL has a gold LEED rating, which is a pedigree for energy efficient buildings. All buildings at LANL should be brought to maximum energy efficiency standards. The lab's many old motors should be replaced with super efficient ones. Solar panels should be on all the buildings, and solar water heating should be the norm. This all sounds expensive, but these retrofits will create jobs, stimulate the green energy industry, and increase national security by making LANL increasingly energy self-sufficient. Los Alamos County, I think, is doing a good job of encouraging energy efficiency in the residences here in Los Alamos. So, in short, my recommendation to Los Alamos is to end its buy of power from the San Juan Generating Station and the Laramie River plant as soon as possible, and buy power from a natural gas plant as soon as possible. There are many natural gas plants in New Mexico, and I suspect that power is available from some of them. Some of them actually aren't very far from here. Also, Los Alamos should build a new combined cycle gas plant at TA3, greatly increase energy efficiency at the lab to lower demand, and work towards buying power from renewable sources over the long run, especially after your scientists store the energy storage problems at large-scale solar and wind plants. Los Alamos has got to be a leader in this area. We owe it to the taxpayers that support the town, and we must all recognize the critical problem global warming will cause current and future generations. With coal being a huge piece of our pollution problem, Los Alamos must end its dependence on coal at the first possible moment. This is an urgent and it is a moral imperative. All right. Yeah. Any questions?
I just would like to hear some comments about the Chinese, what they're doing. I hear the coal power plant there is worth 10 years.
Yeah, it's true. From what I understand, I'm not an expert on this, but from what I understand, the Chinese have been building a lot of coal-fired power plants and importing most of their coal from Australia. And it's the curve of rise in coal-fired power plants in China is beginning to level off and starting to head down. They're serious, I think, about alternative energies, green energies, that kind of thing. So hopefully we'll see that. It's true that when you look at India and China, it's a big problem, the amount of coal-fired power pollution, CO2 pollution in the world. But I think all we can do is do what we do. And I think that comes especially home to a place like Los Alamos, where we have a very intelligent population and a very innovative population. You know, like I say, this is the place to lead. We can do, we'll spread from here.
I worry about even when we cut down coal plants here in China, it's growing. The effect is still going to be
No, it's really true. And I think all we can do is hope that the trend that I mentioned continues in China, and we see that going down. I think China is very clear that they've got a serious problem. I don't think they have their heads in the sand about climate change. And also the visible air pollution in China is a very, very serious problem with human health. And the government there, whatever else it's doing, is not oblivious to these problems.
During the last 3 or 5 years, there are significant number of small to medium shut down. That actually impacts the air pollution a lot, especially in my when in the winter time I go there a few years ago. And I see the sun 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and they're still on the sun. When it's getting better, those pop on land still letting that on the floor a lot. And in my opinion, the just with PCD
How big is your hometown?
that's just, in China, that's just noise. Probably the 400,000 something like that.
So 4 times the size of Santa Fe.
Yeah.
So do you think that's going on as sort of a trend across the country, what you're seeing in your local area?
That's the government force the town, the local power plants. Let's see, in the low certain level of generator, let's see, megawatt or something, what's not. That is only that you operate. That's, I guess it's the system is. So it's not, you don't have the free choice. I can operate it because I can make profit. It's not that way.
Tom, in the audience, we have John Ariston from the utility department, and Fran Burden from the county council. We could say, we could ask if there were any comments to your points with the San Juan.
I just want to make one correction. The county's unit was commissioned in 1982. It's 30 years old, not 50 years old. And the county doesn't have a contract that expires in 2017. We actually own a share of the plant. And as long as it's running, we have a share of power on that. There's a contract that explains how the owners will share costs. We actually have title to a share of the plant. In Wyoming, it's a life of the plant agreement, so it's kind of the same thing.
Right. Okay, well, that makes it even simpler. My attorney advised me that there was a 2017 exit, which...
No, the coal contract expires in 2017, and the owners are looking to renegotiate a new coal supply and looking at different suppliers. So only the coal contract ends in 2017. The current partnership agreement ends in 2022, but we'll just have to write a new agreement with the plant. P&M is planning to run the plant until 2052, and they'll plan to state. And in my opinion, the plant has a book life of 40 years. It's 30 years old. So a car typically has a book life of 5 years. So I'm saying in the power plant world, I think San Juan is like a 3-year-old car as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I accept all that. I would just say that my comments stand, and I would hope that the county would think seriously about divesting of it. And the thing that may or may not know is there's a significant national movement to start shutting down coal plants, and it's fairly successful. There's a large opposition to the plant both in New Mexico and in the Navajo Reservation. So you're going to be swimming increasingly against the current with that. And what I'm saying is that I think it's critical that the county take the moral and the responsible thing to do for the reasons that I outlined to get out of that plant sooner than that.
Tom, I wondered if you have any experience or at least would share your opinions on the possibility of using price differences to drive behavior. One of the things I'm thinking about is I hear you talk about the county, but the county is the citizens of the county, right? We are in the county. And so if we want the county to engage in a given behavior, we, the citizens of Los Alamos, want to engage in that behavior. And one of the ways it seems to me to drive behavior is through our pocketbooks. So if, for example, the cost of electricity at San Juan is here, and the cost of electricity at some other gas power plant is here, then maybe what we should do is just ask ourselves through every individual utility bill, which one of those two bills we'd rather pay. And so I just want to know your thoughts on such a mechanism to drive behavior.
No, I was thinking about that a lot listening to the presidential debate the other night. We can defend coal and attach ourselves to coal, but the price difference between natural gas and coal right now is causing most utilities to make a rush towards natural gas power plants. It's considerably cheaper now. Both power sources are subject to price fluctuations just as oil is. But right now, natural gas is considerably cheaper, which is why, aside from citizen action, that a lot of coal plants are being shut down now. And so, you know, if you want to put the moral or environmental concerns aside, I would say that for now and probably for the foreseeable future, the natural gas prices are going to remain fairly low. Both the presidential candidates are committed to high levels of natural gas production. Natural gas production on private lands is very high in the United States right now, and in the Southwest it's exceptionally high. Powder River Basin in Wyoming is producing an incredible amount of it, which is the same place that the coal for the Laramie River plant comes from. So I would say that if you're talking purely about market forces, the market forces are strongly in favor of natural gas. And that's one of the things that we've been noticing with the San Juan generating plant with the haze rule from the federal government, that they've been sort of sticking to this coal thing. And I understand being invested in it. I'm invested in the cars that I own, to continue your idea, but they're relatively inefficient, and it would be better for me in the long run to get a long-lasting car that's efficient. It's the same thing with the coal plant. So right now the price point is in favor of natural gas, and it's fairly significant.
I just wanted to comment on that. I think, because you said they both fluctuate, but I think one of the few strengths of coal is that the price doesn't really fluctuate. Coal price has been pretty stable over the 30 years that the county's owned the share of the plant, whereas natural gas has gone from $2 to $11, down to $4, now it's back down to $2, and people in the industry say the real cost of producing gas is more like $6 a million BTU, and right now the market is 2.5, just because there's a glut on the market. But when partly tied to the economy and new discoveries of the shale gas, but with this mass conversion of power plants to natural gas, that could change very quickly. Also, in regards to natural gas here in Los Alamos, my understanding is there's like a 20% hit on efficiency at this elevation. And I think it was just 2 years ago where all of our friends north of us lost gas supply in the middle of winter because there wasn't adequate gas transmission within the state. So, I mean, there probably is adequate gas production in the state, but there needs to be some major infrastructure upgrades to get that gas to Los Alamos.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. And the only thing I would say is whenever you're talking about the costs of these different energy sources, it's easy, especially when you're in the business that you're in, to look at the technical aspects of delivering the power or extracting the power and all that kind of thing. There are all kinds of costs that are borne by other people in this case, and the cost of coal in terms of impacts on climate change, which are going to be substantial, and also impacts on the health of people who are breathing the polluted air from it or the polluted water. Those are externalized costs that we don't have to pay directly through our power bill, but we're going to pay those costs through all the problems that climate change is causing and all the health problems that are very direct for people living near the plant. And so I would just urge people to think about that in a slightly larger way, which is the moral thing to do, rather than just keeping it narrowed down to the fluctuations. As I'm saying, I think it's basically irresponsible to continue without a good, what they call an exit strategy in the financial world from these coal plants. That's the right thing to do, both from a financial and a moral perspective, I think.
There's another aspect of the natural gas plants that John and I were talking about earlier, in that they use a lot less water than the coal plants do. I mean, climate change and drought and everything, it seems like anything you can do to minimize the amount of water that you're using to help generate power is the right thing to do.
Right, and that's a really good point, and that's what I wanted to make also. The other thing that's considering the San Juan generating station is the costs of coming into compliance with the pollution control standards is going to be significant, and those plants are just going to get worse in terms of their requirements for pollution control. So those are other costs that aren't there right now, but will be there. And the county, when I say the county, by the way, I'm meaning the power pool, the lab county combination. I'm not talking about the county itself. those costs are going to be borne, and they're going to be borne sooner rather than later. So we have to put those costs in there too. Natural gas, the pollution, the air pollution from natural gas is minimal, to the point where all of these pollution control costs go away. At least in terms of the federal air quality standards, greenhouse gas emissions, all that stuff is relatively low with those.
Excuse me, but round about 17 or 16 tonnes of natural gas still produces 44 tonnes of carbon dioxide. Let's not forget that.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's benign, I mean, it's just it's considerably less than what you get from coal. And it's not, even if we take the if we, you know, that's true with CO2, but all those other SO2, NOx, particulates, mercury is non-existent from coal, from natural gas plants. So all of those are the things that are being regulated by.
You know, we keep on hearing about, you know, natural gas is so clean. It's still producing one of the major
Yes,
contaminants in the air, i.e. CO2.
that's right, absolutely.
And, you know, the message never ever comes across. And, you know, it's chemistry 101.
Yeah, no, I agree with.
Another risk of investing in a natural gas plant is that that'll be the next target of the Sierra Club.
Well,
Well, there's nothing wrong with that because it's true.
Right.
I mean, all of this is all based on scientific fact.
Correct,
Yeah.
so, but we're looking at a bridge, I mean, you
Yes,
mentioned
exactly.
in your
Exactly.
write-up of nuclear power, which my understanding uses even more water than coal does.
yeah, no, my point is, and I believe yours is as well, that I see natural gas as a bridge towards getting to a state of, depending on majority renewable sources, and that's the point I made just now in terms of energy conservation at the lab, everywhere else as well. It's a bridge. The energy storage problem that I mentioned for wind and concentrated solar plants is very real, and I hope that, again, I hope that Los Alamos can work on that. So it's a bridge. We need to make a transition here. We can't just put our heads in the sand or put our heads in the coal and hope things will stay the same.
And I'm with the Sierra Club, and they do agree that natural gas would be a bridge to other forms of energy, so they accept that for the time being.
The day when I took the proclamation, I think it was the proclamation supporting the state implementation plan to the county council, the next day I got up and opened my email from the American Public Power Association, and there was a statement from the Sierra Club that natural gas is a dirty fuel, and they're going to start fighting that. So, and they agree that it's a bridge fuel, but there will be opposition.
Yeah.
And there will be new regulations on drilling and on power plant emissions and so on. So, yeah, regardless of the power source we use,
Yes,
there's going to be opponents.
Absolutely correct. And I would say that watching the environmental community and watching their reaction to all of these issues, I would say that there is disagreement among different people, but there's a certain idealism which is that we should immediately go to these renewable sources, and I don't myself think that's realistic. We have to have this bridge transition period, but we need to get started on it. And Los Alamos is one of the places that can do it, both in terms of research and in terms of setting an example. But I agree, there's always, anything you do, you're going to run into resistance, either from the left or the right or the middle or the up or the down, and you just have to accept that and be as realistic and as moral as you can about the decisions you make.
You know, one of the things that the county, and one of the things that I justify, I guess, are using coal by is we've invested in some renewable sources like our low-flow turbine up at Altitude, which is expensive compared to coal. It's 9 cents a kilowatt hour. The solar project, if we do a solar project at the landfill, it might be 15 cents per kilowatt hour. And we're looking at some wind farms in Utah or Idaho that are maybe 8 cents per kilowatt hour. So quite a bit more than what our customers are used to paying for power. And the only way we can blend that in and make the cost affordable is by using coal as the baseline. But we are adding these renewable sources, I would say at a much greater rate than most utilities in the nation. I think Los Alamos is about 30% hydro, which is pretty good. But it's made affordable by the fact that we have very low cost coal resources, with Laramie River being like the third cheapest plant in the nation. It's about 4 cents per kilowatt hour.
No, I'm sympathetic to the dilemma, and we're all facing it. We're all facing this problem. I'm in favor of high gasoline prices. I'm always, I think that's a good thing. And I'm a person, one of the businesses I run depends, I burn a lot of gas with one of the businesses I run. And it hurts my bottom line, but I still feel like that's a good thing. I don't really think we want to see gas prices going down because it's a good pressure on human behavior. Yeah.
So you talked a lot about what Los Alamos can or should do. I wonder if you could compare and contrast with other nearby communities like Espanola or Santa Fe or whatever.
You know, I would be venturing into an area that I'm not terribly knowledgeable about. I think that, and you probably know more about it than I do, but I think I know that in Santa Fe there's a lot of pressure for developing renewable resources. Basically, the whole Southwest is in the same dilemma. I don't think Los Alamos is unique. It's not like you guys are bad up here or something. It's, we're all overly dependent on coal in the Southwest. There's just no question about it for the reasons that you've outlined. It's cheap, it's abundant, it's nearby. And this is what I've said about Los Alamos is certainly, I think, true for all the communities here. I don't know exactly what the mix is in Santa Fe or Los Alamos. Or in Albuquerque. I would say that the PNM is the dominant utility in this area, and to the extent that people are using PNM as their power supplier, they're going to have a very high mix of coal. PNM is a very conservative company in terms of its desire to maintain its coal dependence. They've been resisting in a rather remarkable way any effort to move away from it. And I know it's a complicated picture, there are economics involved and all that, but nevertheless they are far more intransigent in terms of coal than, say, Arizona Public Service Company is, or the utilities in California are much, much more forward-looking in this. Arizona's a real example. They're really moving towards renewables and away from coal as fast as they can right now.
You know, PNM is an owner of Palo Verde Nuclear Generating Station, and that's one facility that the New Mexico Public Regulatory Commission would not allow them to include in their rate base. So I think that's interesting. Also interesting is at the time that San Juan Generating Station was built, it was illegal to burn natural gas to generate power.
What was that?
The Fuel Use Act of 1970, in the 1970s. So at that time, I think during the Carter presidency, it was assumed we were going to run out of natural gas and we would be saved for other purposes. So, I mean, PNM made this investment of PNM and Tucson Electric Power of $1.5 billion, and now the government is saying, well, you should be burning natural gas. It's just, when you've been around with the industry for a while and you see the regulations, it's kind of funny. But
And not.
yeah, no.
Well, it's an industry that should be regulated and influenced, I think, by public opinion fairly strongly because it affects all of us in such a profound way, both in terms of our access to the power, but also the quality of our environment. And the global warming situation is really turning into a rapid emergency, especially in the Southwest. The water supply problem in the Southwest in the next 10 years is going to become something that will be all over the news. And we're not hearing it very much yet, but the Rio Grande Basin is going to be a real big topic. If you watch what's happening in Santa Fe, for example, they've started taking water directly out of the Rio Grande to use for the water supply for Santa Fe. And that's because the mountains above Santa Fe aren't producing as much water as they used to, and that kind of thing. So, it's a sort of a joke because the river is over-appropriated, the Colorado River is over-appropriated. There's more demand for water than there is, even at a high flow level, than there is water to supply the demand. So now we're seeing water levels decreasing rapidly, and the demand increases. So this is going to be a real serious problem, and it's just something to watch. It's easy to think, oh, well, we're safe. We're getting our water from the deep wells down by the river and that kind of thing. But the aquifers are going to be affected by this also.
Obviously, answer to all this is obviously we talk about this renewable energy and a way to store that.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you have any, where the research is in that technology. We heard this morning, or during our talk, or meeting, that the PV thing that's going over here, they're doing, which two batteries were, one is lead acid, which is not very efficient. And what's the other one, sulfur or something?
Sodium sulfur.
Sodium sulfur.
Sodium sulfur. Is that supposed to be more efficient? And
I don't think either one of them is very efficient. My understanding is the lead acid batteries react very quickly. Sodium sulfur batteries store a lot of dense power. It'll provide 1 megawatt for 6 hours or 7 hours, something like that. So
it seems like that technology is critical to a lot of these issues, and DOE should be in the forefront in trying to solve that problem.
Absolutely. That's exactly
I
right.
don't know what the lab is doing anything or not.
Yeah, I don't know either, and obviously it's above most of our pay grades to influence whether that happens or not, but there are other ways to store energy from these sorts of plants, and one thing that they do, for example, in the Pacific Northwest, when they have excess power coming from hydro dams, they pump water uphill, and then during times of peak consumption, they run it down through turbines, and that's so you use and there, with wind and solar plants, there's work being done now on air compression, so you use power to compress air, and then that air can drive a turbine when the wind or the sun is not doing its thing. So there's things other than batteries that can be done. It's just a matter of thinking outside the box. There's amazing technology being developed all over the country right now. I work in, one of my businesses is working funding energy program, private energy enterprises, both oil and gas and green energy projects. And it's amazing to me the projects that I've seen over the last year that have been directly related to this sort of thing. Some of them are happening up here in Los Alamos. I'm pretty impressed with the things that are going on. It's always a question of getting private investors to get into them so they can be scaled up so that they're useful for municipalities.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thanks, Tom. So we're done. Do we need to adjourn?
We can say we're adjourned. We're all the way down the side of this.
All right, so the board is adjourned, and we'll meet the 15th of, we usually meet the third Thursday.
Sure, it's always the first is the first. So it's the 15th, and I think it's the first.
Anyway, thank you, everybody, for coming. Appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed it.
How you doing, sir? How'd you like the talk?
People in Phoenix are happy to tell us.
Yes, I mean, it'd be interesting.
Yeah. Well, you know, what are we going to actually
number of megawatts, multiplied by 2, how much water does that battery use? Because it needs that going anywhere else. It's like radiator in a car, the air.
Until something else.
It'll probably turn out that it's some sort of evil radiation that comes from driving us all insane. But we won't know for 60 years.
I love that.
Very nice. Stop this thing.